Hello and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Sharmeen Ali. We're going to be talking about some very important developments that took place over the weekend. Namely, one of them was that the Indian Supreme Court released a verdict about the Ayodhya verdict that was due on November 9th. So it ruled in favor of a Hindu temple being built in the place of the Babri Mosque, which was demolished in 1992. And although it condemned the act of vandalism that destroyed the mosque, but it still handed over the actual property to the temple to be built over there. So different reactions are coming out about that. We're going to be talking about that in today's program. Also, Pakistan and India witnessed the opening of the Kartarpur corridor on the same day, November 9th. And this was an occasion for a lot of jubilation, happiness on both sides of the border. We saw Prime Minister Modi congratulate and thank Prime Minister Imran Khan, and vice versa. Prime Minister Imran Khan thanked Prime Minister Modi as well. And we saw the guests who came from India extremely thrilled and happy that they were able to visit this extremely religiously significant place for them, which is one of the holiest places in Sikhism. And daily now 5,000 Indian Sikh pilgrims will be allowed to come and visit Kartarpur temple in Pakistan and without any visa. So this is a huge development because they've been waiting for 72 years for this. So you could see a lot of emotion on that day. Also, Prime Minister Imran Khan has ordered an inquiry into the lack of action being taken place for the complaints that are being registered with the Prime Minister's complaint cell. So we'll be talking about that and what is the reason why there's been such inaction with the complaints that are going through the Prime Minister's complaint cell, which he said he was going to oversee himself. So we're going to begin now and start our discussion with the guests who we have in our studio. Today we have with us Ms. Najma Minhas, who is the Managing Editor of Global Village Space. Thank you so much for joining us on our program, Ms. Minhas. I wanted to begin now by talking about this weekend. It was very interesting. On the same day, you had the opening of Kartarpur corridor, and then you had this Ayodhya verdict in India by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of building a temple there. Although they condemned that the mob attacked the Babri Masjid and demolished it, they condemned that act, but then they also sort of indicated it by saying that give another space for that mosque to be made. What are your comments on this?
Well, it was ironic if we touch upon the fact that, Kartarpur was being opened here in Pakistan, where we welcome the Sikh community to what the Prime Minister has said, the Makkah and the Medina of their faith. And on the other hand, we saw in the Indian Supreme Court Justice decision that came out on Saturday, the 9th of November, which actually gave the Babri Masjid decision in favor of the Vishwa Hindu Prasad. It's one of the longest cases in Indian history. So it's first or second amongst those. But it was ironic because, interestingly, the court, as you mentioned the fact that there was massive violations in terms of the court egregious violation of the rule of law that took place in December 1992 when the mob attacked the mosque and demolished the mosque. So they condemned that action. But yet, on the other hand, they said the balance of probability suggested that the land should be given to the Hindu petitioner, the VHP at the time. And it's ironic because what they justify doing on the basis of which that they've done this is that the Muslim petitioners, the Sunni Waqf Board, has not been able to prove that the mosque was actually, that anybody prayed inside the mosque for 300 plus years. Mm-hmm. So they said from 1528 when the mosque was actually constructed until 1856, 57. There's no documentary evidence produced by the board which actually suggests that people prayed inside the mosque. Now that's unbelievable. I mean, what the hell was a mosque doing there for 300 plus years? And they're saying that you haven't produced any documentary. Wow. I mean, were they expecting phones? Were they expecting, what kind of pictures were they expecting? What kind of documentary evidence
How can you
were they
prove
expected?
That you went and prayed in a certain place?
Whereas
nobody really takes pictures of that.
I mean, exactly. I mean, you don't take an attendance roll call, do you? Saying that who's come and who's attended and who's prayed. So it's very strange that they've made this decision on this thing. They've awarded it to the Hindus by saying that the balance of probability shows that the Hindus used to pray outside the mosque and probably inside as well. And the reason being that in 1855, when there was a Muslim-Hindu riot, the Nawab of Awadh at the time sent his officials in and tried to quieten the issue down. They built a wall separating the inside of the mosque to the outside of the mosque so that there was no clashes between the Muslims and the Hindus. And the Ram's idol was placed outside the grill. Right? So, and that place was then called the Sita Ki Rasoi. And the Hindus were given there, and there's evidence that, you know, there's platforms there showing devotion by the Hindus, and they were praying for the Sita Ki Rasoi. They were praying to Ram at that point. And that apparently is enough for the court to say that
because there were some illustrations,
they show that they pray, right? They don't address the question that if there were riots over the issue, that actually implies that Muslims were praying in the mosque. And that's why there were probably riots between Muslims and Hindus contesting who should be praying and who did the place belong to.
Yeah.
So they don't address that question whatsoever. They leave that question. And then the other thing they do admit is that in 1949, when Ram's idol was put inside the mosque, thereafter the mosque was locked. So in 1949, the mosque was locked because nobody wanted some other further, you know, riots to take place. So the court has accepted that the Muslims were no longer able to pray from 1949 onwards, despite the fact from 1857 till 1949 they were praying in the mosque. They've said no, well, we accept the fact that they weren't able to pray afterwards. However, we can't, since they haven't been able to provide us any evidence to say that they were praying inside the mosque itself, before 1857, that means that there could be, there was no evidence of the fact that Muslims own this property in essence.
Right. So
and that's why they gave it to the Hindus.
Does this show that the Indian Supreme Court is sort of coming under pressure of this Hindutva doctrine and the whole regime that's in place right now in India, the whole RSS the theory and the whole philosophy that's kind of prevalent all over the country right now? Is the Indian Supreme Court under that pressure? Because we see their inaction in the Kashmir issue. We're seeing that they delayed that case as well. So previously, the Indian Supreme Court had been seen to be sort of like a neutralizing element in all of these factors. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you entirely. A lot of the fast tracking that we've seen on this anti-Muslim type issues has happened under the BJP era. So, since 2014, when the BJP have come in, we've seen fast tracking of this particular decision itself. It was fast-tracked until October the 16th. Days and weeks of hearings were held on the issue so that the case could be made a resolution. In fact, everyone was expecting that the decision itself would come out sometime this week. So the fact that it took place on Saturday in itself was a very surprising thing. But that's on this issue. If you look at other issues that are taking place in India, the same kind of events you're hearing on Assam. Assam has a national register of citizens which took place this last 1 year. Fast track, which basically identifies who is a Hindu and who has the right to live in Assam, right? So Muslims are being greatly affected by that particular register as well. Muslims who live in Assam, most of these are of a Bengali origin. Once again, the Supreme Court from 2014 onwards fast-tracked this. So the first case of Assam, the Assamese versus the non-nativists fight started in the 80s. In 85, the Indira Gandhi government, Rajiv Gandhi's government came to some agreement with the Assamese to suggest that, you know, we will have a register which identifies if someone is an Assamese or not. But that was kept quiet. So they agreed to that, but nothing was done on that for almost 20, 30 years. It wasn't until 2013 that very strong action was taken place, and the court suddenly, all of a sudden, once again started saying, we need fast tracking of this, we need some conclusion on this. So that's on the Assamese case, which is probably going to affect a lot of Muslims, and around 2 million plus people are expected to be affected, Muslims and Hindus, but a lot of them are expected to be Muslims.
Well, on the one hand, you're seeing how India is allowing for the speedy sort of assimilation of Hindus that are leaving other countries and settling over
under
there.
the 2016 Act.
Exactly.
So they have a Citizenship Draft Act, which they're waiting for the Rajya Sabha to pass, which basically says that if you are a Hindu Hindu from Afghanistan, Pakistan or Bangladesh, you have the right to move to India, but they haven't given the same right to Muslims. And it all fits in with their right-wing theory. If you go back as far as Golbaka or Savarkar, who is a Hindu, right? So he wrote this very famous pamphlet on which all right-wing RSS ideology is based in 1923, and it's called Who is a Hindu? And he basically says Muslims and Christians cannot be of this nation because their temples of worship lie beyond this country. So he allowed Jains and Buddhists, but he did not accept that Christians and Muslims could ever be sincere to India. So this was his philosophy on which RSS then became based on. And you hear it today as well, that the Muslim gods or Muslim God is based in Makkah, their heart lies in Makkah and Medina. So you hear comments like this, they can never be pure Indian the way people of this, indigenous people of this subcontinent could be pure Indian. So they're not willing to give that latitude to Muslims that they are willing to give to Jains or Buddhists, for example.
Absolutely. And now when this temple, when the Babri Mosque was destroyed in favor of this temple, it was like a sort of the beginning of the poisoning of relations between Hindus and Muslims in the Indian subcontinent. However, we didn't see too many riots going on about this, and the Hindu leaders and the Hindu organizations in India gave out a message to maintain peace and all of that, and Kashmir was relatively silent. So why are we seeing so much inaction where the Muslim community in India is concerned?
Right now? So right now, you know, when this decision was coming out, there was a lot of fear that what is going to be the consequences of this decision. And Section 144, Section 149 was imposed on various parts of UP and other areas as well. The internet went down in a large part of the UP as well. You hear a lot of Muslims moving out of Ayodhya for this particular weekend because they were worried what will be the consequences. You know, so they had a genuine fear that what if the Supreme Court had given the decision in favor of the Muslims, how would the Hindus react? In 1992, thousands of Muslims were killed during that demolition of the mosque itself. So I think you see Amit Shah, you see Narendra Modi, you see all these tweets now that the decision has come in their favor, asking for calm, right? Whereas in 1992, another interesting case which is actually running side by side with this Ayodhya case is the Babri demolition case, which is the criminal case. So this was the property rights civil case. There is the criminal case for which LK, Advani, Uma Bharti and some of the other leaders of the BJP are actually being indicted. That case is yet to be decided, but it is alleged that a meeting took place on the day before 6th of December in which in Vinay Katya's house, who is a very right-wing Hindu, and on a side note, I'll mention to you that he's the kind of person who believes that the Taj Mahal was not created by Shah Jahan, but actually was created in the 11th century by some Hindus, right? So he has that kind of belief system.
And they also say that the Taj Mahal has a lot of Hindu symbolism all over it.
Yes, exactly. So that the evidence is that there's Hindu symbolism without any regard to the fact that, you know, in those days, Muslim and Hindus I mean, it's very famous, at least in our history books, that we're told they lived together as a society. Right? You incorporated each other. So without regard to that. So anyway, this meeting took place in his house where apparently these BJP leaders, LK Advani and so on, actually discussed the next day that we should go and do the demolition of the temple in 1992. So that court case has yet to come and it's to be decided and hopefully in the next 6 months or so. Let's see what happens as a result of that.
Right. So shouldn't the state have a non-sectarian outlook in matters of religion? Now we're seeing it's in India, it's more and more, you're seeing a lot of mob violence against Muslims. Like you said, the state of the Muslims in Assam is really, really precarious right now. We're seeing how Muslims are being treated in Kashmir and they've literally been silenced. And now this verdict of
cow lynchings that are happening for Muslims.
Vigilantism and all. So, I mean,
India has moved away. So India has moved away from that Nehru philosophy that we are all one people and everyone who lives on this nation belongs to India. So Nehru had that philosophy. The Congress Party for many, many decades believed in that philosophy, that whoever lives on this land is part of this nation. The RSS and the BJP do not have that philosophy. So as I was mentioning before, that they believe Muslims and Christians are not from people of this region. So when you have two differing ideologies about who are the people of this nation, then you will have this contradiction where you kick out Muslims, you contest Muslims. And I think that is what is very much happening here,
but
that you see
Muslims
this movement.
don't have a small population in India. They're
Right,
in excess
14%.
of 200 million.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have a large number over there. And yet all these things are being allowed to happen.
Yeah, but 1.1 billion is Hindu,
Yeah.
right? So it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're seeing the right-wing movement across the world. I mean, you're not just seeing it in India. Of course, you're seeing it very strongly in India. And since India is in our neighborhood, it affects us tremendously. But you are seeing the right-wing movement. You're seeing that Hungary has right-wing parties. Brazil has just had a right-wing president being elected. You're seeing right-wing movements in Trump's comments, Brexit movement in the UK. So, we are seeing a lot of right-wing movement, which is, it's, to some extent, on a global scale, it is also a function of globalization and, the other economic factors, how people are being suppressed and how people want to assert their identity by reverting back into their identity, right? But in India's case, I think it's very much related to the fact that the RSS and the BJP are in power. If we had, for example, I mean, I personally believe this, and I go on TV saying this, that if we today had a Congress party in power in India after 9th of November, where Kartarpur was opened to Sikhs in across the world, but in particular, it made it easy for Indian Sikhs to come over. There is no way that our governments over time would not have started talking to each other. Under Modi, I'm not sure that's going to happen. Every single time the Prime Minister has taken his hand out, tried to make peace with Modi, he's just slapped him away.
He's reached a brick wall, exactly.
He's just not interested.
And there's still 4 more years to go to,
Unfortunately,
of this status quo at the moment. So thank you so much for joining us, Najma, Minhas, and giving us all your insights on this very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
After the break, we're going to talk about the opening of the Kartarpur corridor, which took place on Saturday, and the sentiments which were attached with that we all saw. And we're also going to talk about Prime Minister Imran Khan and his wish to have an inquiry into why there's so much of inaction on the complaints that are being lodged with the Prime Minister's complaint cell. Stay with us, please.
The Badshahi Mosque, or the Royal Mosque in Lahore, commissioned by the 6th Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in 1671 and completed in 1673, is the second largest mosque in Pakistan and South Asia and the 5th largest mosque in the world. Epitomizing the beauty, passion and grandeur of the Mughal era. It is Lahore's most famous landmark and a major tourist attraction.
Welcome back to Newsroom. We're going to now talk to Senator Anwar Kakar, who's from the Balochistan Awami Party, and we're going to be speaking about the opening of the Kartarpur corridor. Sir, welcome to our program, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
And the Kartarpur corridor opening on Saturday, we all saw that, we witnessed it, and we saw how much happiness and jubilation there was in Pakistan and amongst the faces of the visitors who we had from India and across the world, the Sikh community. So your comments on that, what was the feeling like? And you were there to witness it, and how did you feel about the whole thing?
I mean, to be honest with you, it was a happy moment after quite a while.
Yes.
In the case of Pakistan's political history, it was a moment where Pakistan is resetting and rebranding itself. It was more important for Pakistan rather than the community who was visiting. Of course, there was a spiritual value attached to it for the Sikh religious faith and community, but it was equally important for Pakistan's image also. And why I'm saying this, definitely Pakistan's branding, Pakistan's rather rebranding and reimagining would be a process. It wouldn't be an event. It wouldn't change altogether with Kartarpur.
Right.
But Kartarpur was the first step or major step, probably there were some minor steps earlier also, but the major step in the right direction. So that's how I see Kartarpur.
Right, as showing Pakistan as a tolerant and sort of all-encompassing and inclusive sort of a country.
And ironically, what happens in the region on the same day, that on your eastern border, a judicial decision came vis-a-vis, again, for a worshipping place of their minority. I'm referring to Ayodhya. And the largest, so-called largest democracy of the world, along with its judicial arm, gave one of the most bizarre verdict, probably in the whole history of jurisprudence. And on the same day, you are initiating Kartarpur. So there were two different lights, there were two different directions, and the rest of the world was observing the whole of the region. They were not just observing Pakistan. So they were observing the region, and in the region, on the one hand, you're heading towards and going towards a transitional democracy where the civil institutions are becoming more stronger day by day. The role of the civil institutions you could see in the lead, though not in the ideal situation, but at least they're growing. They're showing up their muscles and they're showing the soft power and the side of the Pakistan. And on the other side, where people would be taking pride in democratic values and ethos and talking about secularism and inclusiveness and egalitarian society and, so on and so forth. All those fancy words crumbled with this one decision on Ayodhya.
Yes.
And it is being perceived now a state and a judiciary based on bigotry, based on religious jingoism, which is quite surprising, and academia in the rest of the world, practitioners, politicians, media person, they're all trying to explain and understand that what is gone wrong with the idea of the India.
Exactly.
And
it's like
this
now
idea
the
of
fifth most dangerous place for women, and it's just become very extremist,
you can just
and filled with hate.
You can just add lynching, bringing back the so-called Ghar Wapsi movement, which is the idea of bringing back home the people who have converted, in their view, in last 400 or 500 years to the faith of either Christianity or Islam. To them, people are indigenous, but these two faiths are alien. They've been imported. So they want to divorce the people from the idea and bring back the people. So it's a very bizarre kind of arrangement of Hindutva.
Yet at the same time, on Saturday with the Kartarpur opening, you saw a little bit of softening from Prime Minister Modi, thanking Prime Minister Imran Khan, and Prime Minister Imran Khan thanking him back. Naturally, Prime Minister Imran Khan has been a lot more sort of open towards reaching out to India, and he's been getting an opposite response. But this time around, you saw that Prime Minister Modi sort of had to cooperate with the whole thing, and he saw off about 500 Sikh pilgrims who were coming across Kartarpur before they arrived in Pakistan as well.
I mean, there is no doubt that recently, or in the recent past, probably even I would, along with Prime Minister Imran Khan, I would appreciate the rest of Pakistani mainstream political class, that they have been open to the idea of reconciliation, to the idea of dialogue, to the idea of talking to India. It has been other way around. India has been reluctant to come forward, be it Modi's BJP behind the full religious vigor of RSS, or a relatively so-called open and secular Congress. You know, so you do see a mainstream position from the Indian side to just shy away from Pakistan, as they think that Pakistan does not exist. This is the highest level of denial mode. So in that sort, they are treating or handling Pakistan. Yes, Prime Minister Imran Khan has been very open as far as outreach is concerned, but my cautious assessment would be he probably is encountering a very complicated opponent, and that complicated opponent is the idea of RSS and Hindutva. Yeah. Modi is just a symbol. The entire DNA of Indian society has been extremized, if I may use the word, has been maximized. Or
at least the majority, exactly.
Well, when we by all of it, I do not refer that I'm representing or giving a view on 1.2 billion Indian people, but the people who has taken up the guardianship of the state. I am referring towards them. So primarily all the governments, they represent either their state or in a general terms their society. Yeah. So they have inculcated this idea of extremism based on a certain faith. There is nothing wrong with the religion of Hinduism. Hinduism is one of the oldest civilizations, religion, customs, practices, not only inhabited in the great country of India, but equally they have got a sizable presence in this great and tolerant country of Pakistan.
Exactly.
We have got large number of Hindus, and probably after Kartarpur, there would be some Hindu pilgrimage sites.
Exactly.
Even in our province, Ingol Matha, which is one of the largest Hindu pilgrimage site in the whole of the South Asia. The Chief Minister of Balochistan, along with the federal government and Prime Minister Imran Khan, they are thinking to improve and renovate that site also, so that it could attract the Hindu pilgrimages over that site. Right. And then we would be heading in KP towards the Buddhist sites. So Pakistan is becoming, or at least appearing, a state or a society who's quite tolerant towards the faith, which is diversified, which is different to its own mainstream faith. We are very proud Muslims at the same time, but taking pride in our own value system, in our own belief system, in our own identity. At the same time, we have got a sense of respect toward this sense of being other.
Exactly.
Which is very important.
A lot of these sites that you've mentioned, the Hindu temples and even Kartarpur, they were all in a bit of a state of disrepair previously. And now it's surprising that the Sikh community has had to wait 72 years to be able to utilize this Kartarpur corridor. And now that temple, I mean, within a matter of 9 months, was just in a speedy way. It was built up. And that too at a time when you see that there's so much tension between India and Pakistan, probably the worst in many years that we've seen, and still they managed to pull it off. And would you say this is due to the dedication of Prime Minister Imran Khan and his whole team who made this happen, that it actually took place after 72 years?
I mean, there is a token of appreciation for Prime Minister Imran Khan and his team, not just completing this temple within 10 or 9 months of record period, but we have to remember that there is an extreme situation as far as the violation of human rights is concerned in the Indian occupied Kashmir, and Prime Minister has been facing even criticism that at the one hand what Indian state is doing, the kind of attitude it has towards the Kashmiri people, generally the youth, the women, the children, and the tactics, the brutal tactics which they have applied. They have taken rape as an instrument of war. to use and curb and control that sense of freedom, which definitely they have been failed, but they've applied all the brutal tactics. So when we are being confronted with that situation, so at the same time Kartarpur occurs, or it's happening, now the challenge of the leadership is, do you deny that opportunity and show your resentment, your protest, your agitation, the unmasking of brutal Indian actions vis-a-vis Kashmir, or you keep a balance? How do you do that? That probably was more a point of appreciation from the Prime Minister, for the Prime Minister Imran Khan. I link his speech in UNGA with Kartarpur. In UNGA, he did what was supposed to be done, what should have been done for Kashmir and the cause of Kashmir. And over here, at the same time, we are showing, or his leadership is at least showing, that we are not a nation or a state which would be run by rage. We still are rational beings, and our rationality demands to bring things into the correct context, perspective, and keep it balanced.
Yes, absolutely. You have to keep the Kashmir issue in perspective. It's still there. It's very much there.
It's still there. Our commitment is there.
The human rights
not a single Pakistani can
even
even think of, no matter how long would it take, a year, a day, a millennia, whatever. We are there for the people of Kashmir, and our commitment would be there. And with the passage of time, all the support would evolve, and we do not know, we cannot predict what sort of support they would be getting from the side of Pakistan, but that is for sure that this commitment and this support would be there till eternity.
Right, exactly. Now, when we talk about the speeches that were made at the Kartarpur opening, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and Prime Minister Imran Khan both said that the Kashmir issue is, in front of the entire audience, that is still a huge humanitarian problem there, and it's more a humanitarian problem than a political one at the moment for everybody. And if that can be resolved, then the relations between the countries can improve, and then South Asia can sort of flourish. That's what Prime Minister Imran Khan, that's one main point he made for the visitors from India as well, that it's in everybody's interest for this region to flourish, that this issue is resolved.
I mean, it was the right thing to have been said over there. It was the right kind of messaging which the Prime Minister did. There is no doubt about that. If the large size of the Indian state takes its thought process that it can behave in an hegemonic manner in this region, well, they can choose that. They can choose that, to think that way, to behave that way, but that choice has consequences. And that choice has some bad consequences. When you try to be a hegemon, even sometimes very smaller entities, Pakistan is relatively a mid-size entity, even the smaller entities, they start, or there is a sense of resistance. And that resistance sometimes even crumble huge hegemonic entities. History has been teaching us that.
Yes.
So it is in a way a self-destructive mode. This has to be learned and seen by our Indian counterparts.
Exactly.
We cannot force them. It's their choice.
Former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who was also visiting for the Kartarpur opening, when he was interviewed, he said that Pakistan and India need to resolve.
Individual.
They need to, he's a very esteemed and former Prime Minister who's pretty much responsible for the great economy that India has right now.
Doubt.
So he said that India and Pakistan need to resolve their differences, and it's very important. There's one Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, saying that, and you have a current Prime Minister who's doing the complete opposite. So you can see the difference in the thinking between the different parties right now in India as well.
Yeah, I think so. India has produced some great visionary individuals in the political realm. It's not just Manmohan Singh, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was the former Prime Minister from the side of the BJP, his Lahore Declaration, and then coming to Minar-e-Pakistan, and then attending and paying homage to the mausoleum of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was in itself a huge symbolic messaging in the historical context of South Asia.
Right.
The unfortunate part is, I feel, that individuals or the caliber of the individuals on that side is slowly and gradually deteriorating. And that deterioration of the caliber, no matter what idea you represent, but at least you should be quality individual in terms of your intellect, in terms of your emotional balance, and there are many other nuances also. Those unstable individuals are not just creating problems for themselves, but rather it has serious consequences for the whole region, particularly for Pakistan and Kashmir.
Exactly. And now, okay, when you look at Navroji Singh,
they do not see or understand that those actions, no matter how hard they try, it does not or it cannot bring the desired results which they have in their mind.
Yeah.
You cannot have a forced marriage.
Yeah.
The idea of the forced marriage is redundant. It is not recognized by any civilization, by any culture, by any religion, by any value system. You just throw the idea, it would be just a dislikeness, or probably I would try to find out a more stronger word towards that. So they want to have a forced marriage with the Kashmiri nation.
Yeah.
One thing in these 70 years which consistently the Kashmir, a huge section of the Kashmiri population, I would try to be as much as neutral I can, and now with the nullification of 370, there is a probability the whole of Kashmiri population has defied, and that is that they are not Indians. This is the only thing which they have a fight with the state of India. What else is their fight?
Yeah.
It's not the fight about development, it's not about the infrastructure, it is not about the educational system, it is not about democracy or having elections. It's a one simple fact of the question of identity.
That they don't want to be
they
Indians,
are
right.
not Indians. And this is the consistent message for last 7 decades.
Absolutely. So now the moderate voices in India. Now, for example, if you take Navroji Singh Sidhu, who was a big part of this, the making of the Kartarpur corridor, and he was promised this by the Prime Minister in his swearing-in ceremony and by the Army Chief General Bajwa. He was denied twice. They ignored his request to be allowed to come to Pakistan. Third time they allowed him, and then he was turned away from the border at Wagah border when he tried to cross over from there. So they were trying to make it harder for him to come here for this ceremony. And finally he entered through Kartarpur corridor. And then you saw his speech was so heartfelt, and it was so emotional, saying that Prime Minister Imran Khan had a heart as big as the ocean, and he's seen many prime ministers who had leaders who had very small hearts, and he referred to those the small birds that he was talking about, and then he said that Prime Minister Imran Khan's is as big as the ocean. So very, you could see the exchange going on over there and how emotional he felt about it. And he said that 14 crore people, 1.4 billion people are thankful today for this happening. He wasn't just speaking for the Sikhs, by the way. He was speaking to about all of India.
Right. Yeah.
So these are moderate voices, but yet they have to face a lot of hate when they go back to India after something like this.
You've rightly identified. Probably Mr. Singh was at that moment just honest. He just spoke out his heart. He uttered the words the way he felt. The issue with him or likes of him, be it in Indian politics, be it in Indian academia or Indian media, civil society, there is no doubt that there is a reasonable size, if not majority, but there is a reasonable size which has a voice of dissent. They do not agree or they do not prescribe to the Hindu Rashtra or the RSS Hindutva's agenda. The issue is the state of India is making it so difficult for them, and the bars have been kept so high, and this new definition and a new normal of being a patriot in India, and what does it mean, has turned these people, the moderate voices, in such a defensive manner that they have to be very careful. I mean, you just see in last 3 or 4 days, a very renowned journalist, Atish Taseer, his permanent status for visa has been renounced.
Right.
And renounced in a manner, and his mother, I feel pity for her, and I feel bad for her, to be honest with you, as a human being. Probably she has gone through a lot of struggle to raise this child, and which makes her proud this day. And she has all along been the supportive of Prime Minister Modi and BJP's agenda, and she's a very renowned journalist over there, mainstream
It's unpredictable
journalist.
what's going to happen over there
And
right
that's
now.
what is
So,
happening to
due
her just for criticizing Modi in NYT or Time magazine, one of the articles.
Yeah, exactly. So, sir, I mean, due to the shortage of time now, really briefly, I wanted to add that on one of the BBC interviews that Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi gave before the opening of the Kartarpur corridor, he said the way the Berlin Wall fell, this was also the 30th anniversary, November 9th, of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And he said the way it fell 30 years ago, it changed the face of Europe, and Kartarpur corridor can change the face of South Asia. So, would you just like to give a brief comment about that, Rahman?
I think so. The both has very different historical connotations. Both have very different historical experiments, political experiments. Over there, one nation was unified. The German nation was unified, which was bifurcated through an idea of darkness. I do not see an analogy here in the South Asian context.
But in reference to sort of free flow of trade and movement and openness of the two societies for the country to have economic relations.
My personal opinion is that the Berlin Wall reference was out of context.
Right, okay. So let's move on now to our next topic. We're going to talk about how the Prime Minister has started an inquiry into the Citizens Portal and the reason why there's been inaction of government departments to take action on the complaints of the citizens. So let's speak about this, Senator. Your views on this now. Why has there been a sort of lackadaisical response by the departments to these complaints on the PM portal? Because the Citizens Portal was brought about so that common citizens could lodge their complaint and they could, just bring about anything that they wanted to the PM's office, and then it would be given to the relevant departments to resolve. And that's not happening. And it's been several months since this has been launched. So what are your thoughts on this?
My observation is that the problem is that you have got a mechanism of civil bureaucracy, a civil structure, which is your prime arm to implement any agenda of the government, be it of the Prime Minister in the federal government or the chief ministers in the federal, provincial governments. With the passage of time, if you go back to a bit of the history, we started it with the ICS officers, Indian Civil Service, and then it was CSP, and then it later on converted into DMG. These days they are called Pakistan Administrative Service. So this civil bureaucracy has gone through a journey, a long journey of more or less of 100 years. And unfortunately, for multiple reasons, the quality of the individuals who used to run these bureaus, who used to manage these bureaus, has been again deteriorated. The quality of individuals who are managing as bureaucrats is at question. Secondly, a long-awaited civil structure reforms agenda.
Right.
Until and unless we do not go through that, any magic cannot resolve this challenge.
Do you feel that now that he's asked the departments to constitute 5-member committees to conduct performance evaluations and then submit reports within 30 days, and this should be headed by a grade 20 officer or joint secretary, do you think these are sufficient measures to take in order to ensure that things get better going forward, or do you think there's something else required?
I think so. Something else is still required because again, a report would come, and that would probably require an approval of a summary, which would be initiated again by a section officer of a 17 grade, which would go to the deputy secretary and then additional secretary.
Lengthy processes.
And when it would come to the office of the Prime Minister, probably his principal staff officer would write one word, please discuss, and it will go back again. So that kind of routine mechanism is hampering things. It's stumbling, these are the stumbling blocks.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying that there is a requirement, it's a long awaited, that how do you go for the civil structure reforms? Until and unless we do not do that, you probably would be lucky enough to push things in one or two or a couple of instances, but on the long run, the institutional making or the institutional strength or energy or the vigor, that would be still there, and the performance wouldn't go better.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much, Senator Anwar
Kakar,
for sharing your views today on our program. That's all the time we have for today's program, and we've discussed some very interesting developments that took place over the weekend, including the Ayodhya verdict and also the opening of the Kartarpur corridor, which were huge events. And the Kartarpur corridor, namely, was a massive event for Pakistan and for the Sikhs in India. And we congratulate all of them for this opening. And we'll see you next time on our program of Newsroom. That's all for now from me, Sharmeen Ali, and our team.